Welcome to Hoops Royalty. I'm King Jimison, alongside, as always, my man in Cleveland, Karna Venkatraj. And we're here to bring you royal hoops takes about the Memphis Grizzlies in the NBA. And finally, Karna, we have something good to say about the Memphis Grizzlies. They got a win. They're no longer the only winless team in the NBA. Now, they also lost twice since our last episode, so we're unfortunately going to have to talk about that as well. But just give me 30 seconds on your emotions after last night, Sunday's 112-100 win over the Portland Trailblazers.
You know, it was good to beat a team that we're supposed to beat. And something I tweeted from our account was, and we ended up losing this game to the Trailblazers, but it was during the first Trailblazer game where I said, beating teams that you're supposed to beat is how we get this ship turned around and how we get back to 500. I saw an interesting graphic today. It just basically had like wins and losses of teams that we're supposed to beat or favored to beat. We need to beat all of those teams to kind of get as a pathway back to 500. And, beating a team that we're supposed to beat pretty handily, saw some really encouraging signs from Dez and Jaren. So super happy with the performance in that one game. Now we got to build on that and turn the ship around. Also, Shaedon Sharpe, MIP, man. That guy has been hooping. He's a hooper, dude. He's such a hooper. It's crazy.
He is yet another certified Grizz killer. We're adding to the list time and time again because every game this year there's been some new Grizz killer emerging or old familiar foes like Luka, who just always dominates the Grizz. But yeah, Shaedon Sharpe was very good, and that's a big part of why Portland won the first meeting between the teams, 115-113 in OT. Karna, that was a heartbreaker. I mean, I'm not going to ask for your feelings on that one because I know what they're going to be, but that was the lowest point of the season to me because not only are you playing a team you should beat, you're also playing a team that is young. They shouldn't be able to close out a game, and you desperately need a win. And yet you're the team who blows a 10-point lead with 3 minutes remaining. You're the team that doesn't even show up in the OT period. That's when I really started to lose hope about the Grizzlies there for a second.
And this is what I'll say too. And it's the same thing I said the same takeaway that I had from our first game. Until we get a more physical presence inside, a lead is never safe. Like a 10-point lead is no longer safe because second chance points will kill you.
Yep.
And then the lack of internal physical presence makes your perimeter defense cheat in, and then that will affect your perimeter defense.
Yep.
So when we had someone like Steven Adams, or I guess Bismack Biyombo now, which we'll get to, it changes the structure of how everyone plays around that physical presence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what we saw. That was kind of a big difference. It was a perfect A/B testing for all my business analysts out there. You have your first case, your A test, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your first game against the Portland Trailblazers, you give up a lead. You add that physical presence, you add that veteran presence, and everyone seems to be playing well around it. And not to mention people, a player like Santi Aldama also being in the mix. So, we saw the depths within the first Trailblazers games. Now we see the high within the next Trailblazers, within the second Trailblazers game. Hopefully we build on it and stack some wins together.
That's a good take. And to even add to your take, Karna, not only did they add Biyombo, our hero, our savior, they also added one Santiago Aldama back to the lineup on Sunday. So you added not one, but two inside presences. Maybe in Santi's case, not a physical inside presence, but nevertheless, you added two competent NBA players, replaced not competent NBA players in the rotation, and voila, you have a win. In today's episode, we will get into the specifics of those 3 games since our last episode. That will be a loss to the Utah Jazz, loss to the Trailblazers in overtime, and then yesterday's win. And we will also get into a little wider discussion about what the Grizzlies' future should look like, at least their future in this season. That will be in our News of the Realm and our King of the Court or Royal Court segments. But before that, you know where we're starting. We got royal decrees. And Karna, I hear that you have a royal decree for us. Are you ready to give that to the people?
Yes, sir. But I think I need to hear a gavel of justice.
I think you do.
I think I do. I'm
There it is, Karna.
Yeah, I'm legally not allowed to give a royal decree. It's actually in my contract. Okay, we don't have contract. So yeah, I think so. My royal decree is the Grizzlies front office did not put the 23-24 Grizzlies in the best position to win these first 25 games. And that's a good thing and it's a bad thing. Because remember, I stood here and said that the Grizzlies should employ a see what we have strategy. And that has worked for Jake LaRavia. We know what we have in Jake LaRavia. Right? I'm not saying he can't improve. I'm saying we know what he is right now. And that is not a competent NBA player. It just isn't.
No, sir.
But it's valuable. It's a valuable data point to know that. That being said, taking as many games as we did to sign Bismack Biyombo, losing 6 in a row, when you know you need a physical presence inside, right? Especially as soon as Steven Adams goes down, that is front office malpractice. Not having a true point guard like Tyus Jones on the roster, that is front office malpractice. Those are just 2 examples. I've seen many tweets from Grizzlies fans going over the front office moves recently, and they have not looked good. I'm not saying anyone should lose their jobs, and I'm not saying Taylor Jenkins has been a bad coach. I'm saying the combination of Taylor Jenkins and Zach Kleiman have not put us in the best position to perform at the level that we need to win games in the West throughout these first 25 games. Now, that does 2 things for us. One, hopefully, John Morant realizes how important he is to the team and the city and matures a little bit from that. I've talked about that before. The second thing is, I hope it changes the front office's ideas on what we need and what we're drafting for and what we're looking for in free agents going forward. Now we should know how this team need what they need with the potential departure of Steven Adams and Brandon Clark probably not coming back till later in the season. Now we know what we need. Now we know what we're optimizing for. Either we go out and get it or we develop that internally. I don't really care, but now we know what we need.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I used the exact phrase front office malpractice in a tweet this week. And it was referring to the fact that the Grizzlies had the deepest roster in the NBA 2 years ago. And then this year, at least up until last night's game where the bench came to play, before that, the Grizzlies had the worst bench in the NBA. Statistically, eye test everything. Told you that the bench was not only not adding anything, they were actively making it impossible to hold on to a lead because as soon as you turned to the bench, you were getting nothing. And the other team was getting everything offensively. So, yeah, your see what you have strategy made a lot of sense based on the Grizzlies' last 2 regular seasons, where they seem to be invincible to any kind of absences in the lineup. People in and out of the lineup didn't really matter. Steven Adams, his absence at the end of last season did substantially change things, but before that, you hadn't really seen any one player's absence, even John Morant, take this team out of contender status. They were always a competent regular season team. With that kind of environment, yeah, you can have a chemistry lab. You can try to figure out who's going to stick and who's not. Unfortunately, this year's team is not in that position. Every person you roll out on the court has to be competent, has to be ready to do their job because you don't have the depth to support and you don't have the identity to support winning if you're putting non-NBA players out on the floor.
Do you know what's emblematic of this issue? Like this, what really scares me is LaRavia for the first 3 games was getting a lot of play. So was Derrick Rose. Yeah. There's a guy on our team that currently has an assist-to-turnover ratio of 5.5. I believe he leads the team. Would you like to guess who that is?
I'm going to guess him Jacob Gilyard.
It is Jacob Gilyard. Sorry, Conchar has a higher one at 6.0.
Conchar. Advanced stat god, John Conchar.
But like 2.8 assists, leads the team with limited minutes. I mean, or not leads the team, but I think leads all bench players.
Mm-hmm.
this guy's on limited minutes, but when he's out there, it just looks different, right? Sorry, 2.0 is not nearly the top, but I think from an eye test,
I see your point though.
From an eye test perspective, we know that Jacob Gilyard can play point guard, unlimited minutes in the NBA. And at times when you're trotting Derrick Rose out there, and he's wildly inefficient with the basketball, and oftentimes has a bad assist to turnover ratio, why don't we know that this guy that's been on our bench now for 2 years can play basketball, right? Can be an assist leader. So
yeah,
a front office, I think that we've come to kind of lionize from a player development perspective, drop the ball within these first 8 games. And I think, or 7 games. I think they will learn from it. I'm not calling for anyone's job. I think they just need to learn from it and maybe do a deeper evaluation of what you have on your bench and the specific strengths and weaknesses that apply to our current situation. That would be my path forward. Not like losing a job or anything. No one deserves to lose a job. We've drafted incredibly well.
I don't know. I will say this. Zach Kleiman was maybe like my second favorite member of the Grizzlies organization behind John Morant 2 years ago, because I gave him so much of the credit for who they drafted, who they developed, them identifying Desmond Bane at the end of the first round, them going after Brandon Clark in the same draft as Ja. Even like Santi Aldama last year seemed like a massive win to get that guy in the last pick of the first round. But the 2022 draft seems to have been a bust. We'll get to that. I think it's a good transition to my role decree here in a second. But you're not getting real NBA level play from Jake LaRavia, and for the most part from David Roddy too, although I think he looks a lot closer. And then you have the fact that they tripled down on youth, to use Kleiman's own words, when they didn't necessarily have to. Now, we don't know what Robert Pera, the owner, was telling Kleiman about salary cap implications. And maybe he was saying, you need to drop salary. We're not going to resign and pay these guys. I'm not going into the luxury tax, and certainly not going into the luxury tax for DeAnthony Melton and Kyle Anderson. But the fact remains, they were on your team. You traded Melton. You let Anderson walk, and you replaced them with rookies who weren't ready. That is something that Kleiman has to own. And unless those rookies become NBA rotation players, it's going to be a major reflection on his tenure as the Grizzlies GM, and could be a reason why, if this season really goes south, he loses his job. But you got into Derrick Rose. We've gotten into Jake LaRavia. That is a perfect segue to my royal decree. My royal decree, Derrick Rose and Jake LaRavia should be out of the lineup. Okay, we'll talk about why in a second. But the upshot of that is the healthy 10-man rotation they'd be leaving behind is actually a pretty good one, with decisions to make for the coaching staff, like hard decisions about decent players who you're choosing to either put in the rotation or leave as coaches' DMPs. So we know that Bane, Smart, and Jackson is a given, not only in the rotation, but in the starting lineup. Then in the front court, you have either Biyombo or Tillman. Not a bad choice there. And you have either Zaire or Kennard. We had Zaire cemented in that starting spot. I think there's starting to be reasons why that starting spot might even go to Kennard, particularly if you are playing Biyombo at center and have that defensive presence. Then you're going to bring Santi off the bench. That's a given. And that's when you get to the decisions to make. Conchar, Roddy, Gilyard, Kenny. 4 decent players. Each have things they do really well. Choose 2 and let's ride. There's your 10-man rotation. I'd go with Conchar and Roddy. Conchar because he gives you the exact hustle plays, rebounding, deflections that you need, that have been your identity the past 3 or 4 years and that are starting to become your identity again. And Roddy because he's just a do-something guy. While we just said he may be a bust, that's much more in LaRavia's direction, because Roddy goes out on the floor and makes things happen in a way that makes it hard to leave him out of the rotation. And his versatility with his size, but also pretty decent athleticism, means he can fill holes at multiple spots in the lineup. So that's who I would go with. But Derrick Rose and Jake LaRavia have a great season on the bench. I really hope you enjoy it. Derrick earned that money by mentoring Ja, by turning him into the best version of himself. Jake earned that money by being a fantastic trade asset, which you can't even be that because you're not going to play. But that would be the only thing he has left to offer the Grizzlies at this point. Maybe another year playing with the hustle, he gets to a point where he's an NBA player. That's the best hope that we have at this point. But those guys are not ready. And the biggest problem with Derrick Rose specifically, because I think he's more controversial in this regard. LaRavia, everybody's saying, don't play him. I saw a hilarious tweet that it was his birthday on Friday, and they were like, have a great birthday, bud. Just go ahead and take the night off. And every Grizzlies fan was like, yes, great night for you to rest up. And everyone after that too. But the problem with Rose is he's not willing to be Jacob Gilyard. And I understand why he's not. But he's coming in and shooting far too many shots for a backup point guard who you just want to be a facilitator. And that's why, even though Gilyard is 5 foot, I think, and
don't do my boy like that.
Might not be able to touch the net, he's still a better fit for the rotation right now because he is out there to pass, and that's it. He's setting up better players than himself. Rose, because he's an MVP, is not willing to do that, and that's why he shouldn't be playing.
You know what? You said it perfectly. First of all, Gilyard is 5'9". We love our four kings. Part of the Hoop royalty family, of course. No, just kidding. Look, Jacob Gilyard is a good example of this. He's a better, younger player. I agree with you. Let's give him more playing time over Derrick Rose. You mentioned David Roddy. I just want to touch on him real quick. I think what he's searching for right now, I don't know if he'll find it in Memphis. I think he's an NBA level player that is searching for consistency. And what I mean by that is consistent touches, consistent playing time. I think he is still trying to figure out his game at the NBA level. And in the see what we have strategy, him and Zaire have really become two really, really good young players. Not really good, but good, serviceable young players that we can give playing minutes to, and they can do something with those minutes and be efficient scorers when they want to be and when they can be. What Roddy's looking for is consistency. If you look at his performances, sometimes he'll be scoring in the 15 to 20 range, and then others he'll completely disappear from the floor. What that shows me is that he can score and be effective offensively in the NBA. It's just hard to get that chance when you're kind of in a tweener role on a team that doesn't always need a tweener out there. So that's kind of, and when you have someone dynamic defensively like Jaren Jackson Jr. that can kind of fill holes defensively, then your defensive value added to the floor becomes less, and you can't show off the offensive value that you do have.
Yeah.
So that's my thought on David Roddy. I think I don't know if he'll fit in the Memphis systems or he'll win a championship in Memphis. I do think he's a solid player, though, and a solid prospect for other teams. You guys hear that? Trade us Kevin Durant for David Roddy. That's what I think y'all should do.
Super fair trade.
Fair trade.
All we got to do is just make the money work, and I think the Suns would be all over it.
Yeah.
And I want to clarify something. Like, I'm actually not necessarily saying play Jacob Gilyard.
No.
In my opinion, I would say let's not play a backup point guard because Bane and Kennard can kind of handle that. If you just stagger the minutes between Smart, Bane, and Kennard appropriately to where there's always one and hopefully two of them on the floor, then just let one of them be the ball handler, let the other one play off ball. I know that we've had some issues with Marcus Smart being on the ball, and honestly, I just can't wait to see him transition to off the ball when Ja returns and just let him do his chaos defensively. Let him just be a decent shooter off the ball, but even more than that, a creator on the wing. That's his perfect role. Just as a pure point guard, it's not great, but having him on the floor, even as a pure point guard, an imperfect role is better than having Jacob Gilyard and way better than having Derrick Rose.
Yeah.
So I think just don't play backup.
One person that scares me more than anyone is Kennard. I saw some passes against the Trailblazers where I was like, he tried to entry pass to David Roddy, and it was the most easy steal I've seen in the NBA game in a while.
Fair.
But I mean, we are, in the point guard position, it's spit and duct tape holding this thing together right now.
Yeah.
So I point well taken. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's less so that they're good point guards. I mean, I would say Bane is becoming a decent point guard, but he's better off the ball. All of them are better off the ball.
Yeah, Luka made his money off the ball.
Having two of them on the floor, even if they're not great point guards, it just helps everything offensively, and in Smart and Bane's case, defensively as well. So there's our royal decrees. A lot there. We're placing the blame on the front office. Yes, absolutely. Kind of relitigating that from last week. It's crazy that we've gotten here after Zach Kleiman was the executive of the year in 2022, rightfully so. But how the mighty have fallen. The same guy who won the executive of the year basically traded or did not re-sign the players that earned him that title, and that's where you leave the Grizzlies' depth with now. But let's get to the news of the realm, where we're going to talk more specifically about these last three games that we've been alluding to a lot on the show already. And for that, we're going to need those trumpets. All right, Karna, since we last talked, Grizzlies lose to the Jazz, get blown out by the Jazz. Horrible game. I thought that was the low point, losing 133-109 on the road. But then actually it got worse, believe it or not. It could get worse because the overtime loss to Portland was just a gut punch. You hold a 10-point lead with 3 minutes to go. You lose it, and then overtime is pretty solidly controlled by the Trailblazers, even though they only end up winning by 2. It didn't feel that close. They took control of the OT period from the jump. But then, role reversal in the next game against the Trailblazers. Trailblazers, after trailing at halftime, go up 12 in the fourth quarter. Grizzlies storm back in the game on a 26-2 run and win 112-100, completely flipping the narrative. If they'd fallen to 0-7 with 2 consecutive losses to the Trailblazers, I had a tweet in my drafts ready to send that was Grizzlies 2023-2024 season, and then it was a gif of James Franco in the interview driving a tank. That was in the draft.
Yeah.
Thank goodness I didn't have to send it because they got to win. But Karna, what are your takeaways from these last 3 games of Grizzlies action?
Bismack Biyombo was a great signing.
Bingo.
Even if it was just that one game, honestly, even if he just provides us one game of relief, that he just looked like he fit in. I think a lot of people clowned when he only played like 0.2 seconds in his first game.
Yeah,
you got to remember this guy's coming off of not playing for an NBA game for a little while. He's 31 years old, which is, he's a bigger guy, so it's a 31 Jacob Gilliard's going to look different than a 31-year-old Bismack Biyombo. So there's some age there. So, he's looking like he's fitting in. It's a great signing by Kleiman. We looked at the front office and we really pointed some fingers there earlier in this episode. Yep. I think we can say that Bismack Biyombo, and then the next 5 games will tell us more, but at least at the initial sight is fitting in well and doing what he's supposed to do. That was my first takeaway. My second,
we got to give some credit there because we mentioned his name on the episode where we talked about potential signing options. That was our top choice. And honestly, it's not much to take credit for because he was the obvious choice. Of all the unsigned centers, he had the best track record. And it's just crazy how much adding a guy who can rebound, block shots, and provide some physical screens just changes everything for the Grizzlies. For whatever reason, the way they play are so reliant on that type of player.
Now I think I get a better understanding of why we were jacking up so my second takeaway is that we stopped jacking up so many 3-pointers.
Thank you.
Or at least like the shot selection looked better. And I think I maybe understand the analysis behind it a little bit more, where they were like, okay, we don't have a physical presence inside, and our only physical presence inside isn't a great rebounder in Jaren Jackson Jr. Long shot, long rebound. Maybe like we just catch fire these first couple, which we didn't, by the way. If you're wondering, we did not catch fire. Maybe the exact opposite of catching fire, catching ice, but or rim. But I just think like now with this more dynamic presence in Bismack Biyombo, we can change our strategy, actually run half court offense. And then, if we still want to jack up 3-pointers, I'd rather have Desmond Bane open than a contested Marcus Smart 3-pointer or Derrick Rose 3-pointer or Xavier Tillman 3-pointer. So all that's to say is the addition of Bismack Biyombo now opens up how we run our offense a little bit more dynamically. And those are my two takeaways from that last Trailblazers game.
Those are fantastic takeaways. Agree with both of them. Biyombo is not going to look as good as he did on Sunday in every game. But the Grizzlies really aren't asking him to do much. They're basically asking him to be good at the things he's been good at his entire career, which is rebounding, blocking shots, setting screens, and just asking him not to be an utter black hole on offense. Like, just don't miss layups. And if he can do that, he's helping you. And it brings out the best in Jaren Jackson Jr. We talked about that as the value of Steven Adams. Well, in a smaller way, that's the value Bismack is providing as well. Is he's allowing Jaren to focus on blocking shots, focus on being a roamer defensively, to focus on being a scorer offensively, not having to be the screen setter. And Bismack is just there to clean up the rest. So, fantastic signing. It's going to lead to an interesting discussion at the end of this 25-game suspension as to whether the Grizzlies will keep Bismack, keep Kenny, or maybe try to keep both and cut somebody else. But there is going to be a roster crunch, and my hunch is Bismack is not going anywhere after 25 games unless he gets hurt, because he proved himself in that fourth quarter alone that he changes things for the Grizzlies. But my takeaways, one of them was the same as you. Guess what? When you stop relying on shooting the three with bad 3-point shooters, the offense got a little bit better. Surprise. The Grizzlies set a franchise record for 3-pointers attempted and 3-pointers missed against the Jazz. Shocking how that went, that they lost by 24 points. It wasn't even that competitive, but a little bit more strategic or a little bit less focus on the three in the two Trailblazers games. And of course they lost one of them, but they played better in both, including offensively. 10 of 35 from three in the first game, and that wasn't what killed you in that one. I can tell you that. And then last night, an actual good performance from three for the Grizzlies. They shot 40%, and that was on a pretty reasonable number of attempts. 13 of 32 for 40% shooting. That's exactly what you want from the Grizzlies 3-point shooting. You're not going to get it every night, but that kind of low 30s in attempts, and hopefully you can at least shoot league average, at least shoot 35%, and you're chilling. For what replaced the over-reliance on 3-point shooting was a return to your identity. The Grizzlies weren't excellent on the boards, but they were better. And more than that, the stocks are back. This Grizzlies team that has built their defense specifically around blocks and steals is in the top 10 of both of those categories again. And it is actually leading to a little bit of fast break offense. Grizzlies are 5th in steals, they're 3rd in blocks, and the fast break points aren't necessarily still there, but they're trying to get out in the run. They're 6th in the NBA in pace. And I saw some really encouraging things from the Grizzlies on the break. Desmond Bane wants to push the pace, downhill Des, but Marcus Smart's pushing the pace now too. I loved the on the jump ball tip, his beautiful over the head pass to Desmond Bane for a wide open layup. He's starting to try to get out in the run as well. They are trying to get back to the Grizzlies way. They don't have as good of players as they did when they were ripping and running with Ja and Melton, and you had Anderson gobbling up every steal, but Marcus Smart is bought in on getting those steals, leads the NBA in steals. And Jaren obviously going to block shots, but having Bismack is going to add to that total. Santi going to add to that total. And so I think you're going to start to see the Grizzlies be able to build their identity around getting out in the run. That's going to fix some of their structural offensive problems.
Okay, I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, like, I think those transition offense is going to be incredibly important.
Yeah.
As we kind of go through and fill some of the holes offensively that we have without John Morant. And even when he does come back, I think it's this huge way that we start to beat some of these, even not even just bad teams, but also some of the good teams, is outrunning some of these older teams that don't play defense as efficiently nor as effectively as the Grizzlies do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not only do we have a great interior defense with Jaren Jackson Jr., Bismack, Biyombo, but our perimeter defense, which has underperformed in the losses that we've had, will also be helped. Something I said earlier is like the physical presence inside helps because you don't need as much help team rebounding. There's not as much second chance points given up. And I think what will happen is as our team becomes more dynamic with the inside physical presence, our perimeter defense numbers will start to better.
Yeah.
So that's my prediction too. But I agree with your takeaways, King.
Yeah. And the broad takeaway is focus on what you do well and avoid doing the things you're bad at.
Crazy
Which
takeaway, man. Just crazy.
basically means the only things that the Grizzlies that I can find right now are top 10 in the NBA are blocks and steals. Also in 3-pointers attempted, but because they
stop that. Don't do that.
Because they make so few of those 3-pointers, they're 4th in 3-pointers attempted, they're 10th in 3-pointers made. So there's a gap there.
Yeah.
But that's not even what they're worst at. They're much worse at turning the ball over. They're among the bottom in the NBA in turnover percentage. They're among the bottom in the NBA generating free throws attempted per game. And they're among the bottom in the NBA in 2-point percentage. So an even bigger issue than the threes is the inability to score efficiently in the half court, including inside the arc. That's just probably a structural problem. And they're trying to fix that by running more of the offense through Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. But those guys, as good as they are, and by the way, they're both fantastic, can only do so much. So getting out in the run is going to be the way to mitigate those half-court offensive problems, which hopefully Ja and some better 3-point shooting over the course of the season can fix from a long-term perspective. Any takeaways from these games before we move on to the roll court?
Guard Shaden Sharp. That's my big takeaways.
That would have helped, yeah.
Yeah, Shaden Sharp and Lauri Markkanen. Let's start guarding those guys. That's my big takeaway from the game. No, I mean look. I think Grizzlies fans will have some recency bias and be like, "Oh, well, this is our path back to 500. This is our path." But I think we need a sense of real. It's a long path, but there's a sense of realism that we need here too, right? Where are we competing for top 3 in the West anymore? Probably not. I'm just going to be honest, probably not. And that'll take us nicely into our Royal Court. But just now we know what we have and we know how to make it work. So the expectation should be winning the games that we're supposed to win and competing in the games that we're not supposed to win and maybe stealing a couple of those until John Morant comes back. Stop the bleeding, win what you can, compete where you can't if you're not favored to win. And when Ja comes back, that whole paradigm shifts. I was thinking about it this morning. You kind of think about it when someone comes back for injury around the deadline. We call it almost like a shadow deadline acquisition in baseball. This is what that is. Yeah. We get an infusion of talent that no one in the NBA will get. If we can go 500 or close to it, or even double-digit wins, like King mentioned, we'll be okay.
There's going to have to be a pretty massive trade if any team adds a player during the season better than John Morant.
Yeah.
Just put it that way.
Yeah.
And by the way, we're not going to go into this again because that was a topic of a previous episode, but did you see that Josh Primo is being signed by the Clippers and looks like he's going to be able to play?
They don't care. They just want to win.
They don't care.
They don't care. They just want to win.
Well, and not just from the Clippers perspective, but from the NBA perspective, the fact that he's being allowed to play, after his little 4-game suspension, while John Morant is going to be on the saddle for 25 games for doing something that was not at all illegal. Dumb, really dumb, but not illegal. It's just, it gets crazier every second. And I think people are going to look back on the suspension and say, seriously, like that was the punishment for those actions.
Yeah. I don't understand what the Clippers organization was doing in this moment. I won't lie. I don't think it's particularly moves the needle all that much for them. I think they have some of the, like, it doesn't add anything that they, I don't know. It was just a weird signing.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. It's a weird look from the NBA now. When he was out of the spotlight, it wasn't, because we all just came collectively to the understanding that we weren't going to sign a guy who has not even a checkered past, a bad past. Look, yeah, I don't even care. Let's just have John Morant back. That's all I care about. I care about the Memphis Grizzlies.
It's just very curious that suspension wasn't,
it's
to
bad.
our knowledge, appealed.
I think it's wrong. I just don't like. If I had Adam Silver's number, I'd be like, "Hey, dog, like you're messing up." But like, yeah,
nothing the Grizzlies can do now but wait. Yeah. And I think that's a good transition to our last segment on the Royal Court. All right, Karna. This time we may actually get a little bit of that heated debate on the Royal Court. The topic at hand today is 2 parts. Number 1, are the Grizzlies a playoff team still? And the second part of that question is, should the Grizzlies tank? Now, this team is literally at the bottom of the NBA standings, 30 out of 30, with a 1-6 record. And obviously, we just talked to you about how hard it was to get that one win. You had to come back from a 12-point fourth quarter deficit. So where's this team headed, Karna? Are they a playoff team? And outside of that, if you answer no, should they be tanking?
Well, actually, let's start with the second one first, because then we don't need. Should they be tanking? So, in recent memory, I think we have an example of a team that was really good for one season, or really good for, they built a whole dynasty, and then they had one off season, right? It's the Golden State Warriors.
Yep.
Who do they pick after that draft?
I believe it would be Memphis' own James Wiseman, franchise-defining player.
Okay, so James Wiseman, right? James Wiseman currently has only played 6 minutes in the last week for the Pistons, for not the team that drafted him. What I would encourage people to think about is that we just went through a draft that was really, really hyped up because of Victor Wembanyama. Guys like him don't come up every season. It doesn't seem like there is going to be a guy this season like Victor Wembanyama. So I think I would encourage people to think, what are you tanking for?
Yeah.
You will get a marginally better pick, but will you get a superstar? Will you get someone that's drastically going to change the outcome of your franchise? And then what are you giving up? You're giving up meaningful minutes. You're giving up a year in Dez, Ja, and Jaren's prime. 3 guys who can get you to a championship, who are talented enough to get you to a championship. So do I think we should be tanking actively? No. No, I do not think we should be tanking actively. Let's see if we agree on that one, King.
Until you are mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, no team featuring a healthy Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, and John Morant should be tanking. That core is at least very close to being a championship level core. And anytime you have that together, you have to go for it. The difference with that Warriors team, which, by the way, you're exactly right. They didn't get anything out of that tanking season besides maybe fresher legs the next year for the playoff run. But even if they had gotten a meaningful player, the reason why they tanked is because you had Steph and Clay out for the season and Draymond running the show, and we all saw how well that worked. They didn't necessarily tank by design. Now, at a certain point, they said, okay, we're not going to bring guys back. We're going to play young guys. they got to the point where they said, we're not making the playoffs. We might as well take this opportunity to try to add a high draft pick, whatever. But they got there not of their own design, and it didn't net them anything. The same should be true of the Grizzlies. If they are tanking, it's because one of those big three guys gets hurt beyond Ja's suspension, and hopefully that's not going to happen. So hopefully this isn't even a conversation.
The only argument I'll hear on this is like a higher draft pick could net you a higher trade value for that draft pick. So like that's the only thing I'll hear. That's the only that's the only thing I could even conceive of being a tanking. Yeah. Like a reason for tanking.
We talked about it last week. The truth is people assume their windows are a lot longer in sports than they actually are. And people also assume that if your team is struggling in the regular season, that's going to translate to the playoffs as well. A lot of the time, that second one is true. Obviously, if you have to have a decent regular season to make the playoffs, and generally the best teams in the regular season are the best teams in the playoffs. But we are coming off a season in which a 7 seed and an 8 seed made the conference finals and proved that farting around in the regular season, dealing with injuries, yes, but more so dealing with inconsistent play, and then finding that right combination in the playoffs, it's a season of its own. So you just have to try to get there when you have three players as good as Ja and Jaren and Dez. And while you have them signed for a long time, you don't know how many healthy peak seasons you're going to get from those guys. And based on what we've seen from Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane, we are getting peak seasons from them right now. Desmond Bane is averaging 26.6 points per game, carrying the offensive load in a way nobody thought he could, even during his breakout sophomore season. And Jaren Jackson Jr. averaging an efficient 21.6 points per game, getting the rebounds, limiting the fouls, doing the things that we asked him to do, career high in assists as well. These guys are peak of their powers right now. So you put them next to Ja Morant and you just get something out of your role players. This team could make noise in the playoffs. There's no point in tanking.
And this is one thing I'll just keep saying, like, forget basketball for a second. I love basketball. I work in baseball. We just saw a World Series where the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Texas Rangers were, which is actually kind of a fair reason to think tanking might work, but these guys, both teams, were not solid in the regular season. Neither of them won their division. They got to the playoffs, they won big games, and performed in big moments. That's what the Grizzlies' outcome of the season should be. It shouldn't even be winning the division. I don't even care about that anymore. What I care about is getting to the playoffs, having a healthy Ja, healthy Dez, healthy Jaren, and seeing what we can do in the playoffs. So with that in mind, King, do you think the Grizzlies are a playoff team?
I think they will sneak in. Yes. I think you look at a team like the Lakers last year and you say that team getting to the play-in was really what they needed to do because you trusted them to win those big games. Now, the West play-in could feature some really good teams this year. And we talked about how there are 11 teams, and that's not even including the Utah Jazz who just stomped the Grizzlies, but there are 11 teams in the Western Conference who believe they should be in the playoffs. I just think that the Grizzlies bar has shifted from surefire top 6 team, surefire playoff team, to let's get to the play-in. I still think they will because we've seen the worst, hopefully, of what the roster will look like. And that was particularly after the Pelicans game until this last Trailblazers game where you didn't have Santi Aldama, you didn't have Luke Kennard for most of that stretch as well. You didn't have Bismack, Biyombo. All these guys that you're adding are better than the players they're replacing in the lineup. You're going to start to see a gradual building up. They're going to be below 500 when Ja Morant comes back. Probably going to be below 500 when the calendar year turns. But I would expect by the trade deadline, they're going to be back in that 500 range, back in that play-in mix. And hopefully this team is not going to be woeful in crunch time like they were last year. And they're going to be able to actually win on those margins. They're going to be like a Miami Heat-esque team that is able to pull out more of those close wins that you expect, and that moves them up the standings.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. You look, like I've been saying a lot, we have to win the games that we have to win. Now,
Yeah.
there's no dropping something to the Rockets in February. You just have to win those games now, right? There's no upsets anymore. There's no least talented teams beating us. We unfortunately used up all of those earlier in the season. So it's time for us to beat the teams that we have to beat, stay competitive, and steal some games from the teams that are a little bit better than us right now.
Yep.
Talent-wise. And that will be a winning formula for us to get to the playoffs. Then we start creating chaos. Jaren Jackson Jr., 30 points a game, Ja Morant ending LeBron's career, dunking on him, stuff like that. Easy stuff, right? That's
the stuff of our deepest fantasies.
Yeah, but that's what we need, though, to beat the teams that we have to beat and steal some games from the teams that we maybe shouldn't be beating on a night-in, night-out basis. Play scrappy. That's what we have to do now. We have to play scrappy, which the city of Memphis and the Memphis Grizzlies should be accustomed to. So it's a natural fit.
That's a great point you make, and it harkens back to my royal decree last week, where I said the Grizzlies don't have an identity. And then this week, I'm starting to feel like the Grizzlies might have a little bit of that identity coming back. The difference in this season, though, it's not going to be about Ja Morant. It's not going to be about Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane even. It's going to be whether, as a collective, the Grizzlies can play Grizzlies basketball, can be the team who plays harder on any given night, can be the team that dominates those hustle categories, steals, blocks, hopefully at some point rebounds, who's not beating themselves and who is taking the physical fight to their opponent every night. If they get to that point and then you top that with the talent of Morant, Jackson, Bane, then you're looking at a team who can make noise in the playoffs. And I still see that as a possibility. And that's why I'm not willing to say they're not going to make the playoffs until I see this team whole again and see whether or not it's going to work with this collection of role players.
Yeah, I agree. Let me play devil's advocate just for a second here, because we both just agreed on two things in the royal court, and I won't have it.
Sure.
I won't stand.
No. That it's defaming the royal court. Absolutely.
Yeah. If we do get to this play-in tournament, which let's say we do, right? Do you think the Grizzlies, as they are right now, with the role players that they have right now, can actually conceivably make a contending run? Because one thing we've talked about is how the Heat stack up against where we are right now, right? A team that, worked its way into the playoffs, wasn't a super high seed, wasn't the cream of the crop in the East, not a great conference, to be fair. Do we have the role players that are able to perform in big moments like Gabe Vincent and like Max Strus at sometimes? And then do we have the big game players that are our stars? Bam Adebayo to a lesser extent, but Jimmy Butler. The people that are going to get it done in the playoffs no matter what. And then do we have the veteran presence that we need? Kyle Lowry was a calming influence on that team. Do we have that in our locker room? Just something to think about.
Our veteran presence isn't calming, that's for sure.
No, Marcus Smart is anything but calming.
And I think that might be a good thing. He may be the galvanizing veteran presence that they need. I mean, I see what you're saying, and it's hard to find similarities between these teams at this point. I think the only similarity would be both the Heat and the Grizzlies have the stars you need. They have the stars in place, and that's the hard part. And so the question is, at what level are your role players playing? For most of last regular season, Max Strus and Gabe Vincent were not playing very well. And then in the playoffs, they turned into all-stars. And I don't see anybody on this roster who I necessarily think that's going to happen to. But if you're still bullish on the Grizzlies, you are saying that Luke Kennard being fully integrated into this team is going to be one of the best bench players in the league. certainly hasn't been to this point, but he showed life on Sunday. That Santi Aldama is going to continue to get better in his third year. Didn't look great in his return to action last night, but it's still reasonable to have faith there. And that having somebody like Biyombo on the roster, or if they make a trade for an even better center, getting that physical presence back is going to be what unlocks the roster. I don't see it. I think, frankly, this team's probably headed for a low seed and a first-round playoff exit. But you got to go for it because you have this trio who's good enough to win a championship. You have to be in win now mode the whole time until the math is so stacked up against it that you have no choice but to tank.
I agree.
Any last thoughts, Karna, as the Grizzlies embark on a little bit of a quieter week? Not as many games, but they will play the Miami Heat on Wednesday, Utah Jazz on Friday, both those games at home, and then on the road Sunday against the Clippers.
Those two teams are teams that are good tests for us.
Yeah.
They fall into a middle category. Utah has made some improvements. Jordan Clarkson and Lauri Markkanen are balling.
Yep.
Can we stop them with our new look Grizzlies? Miami Heat culture. Let's see what we can do against that team. Those are two good tests, and we'll come back to you guys on Monday with potentially, hopefully, a lot of positive things to say about what Taylor Jenkins and what the bench has done to turn these Grizzlies around.
Building off the momentum of Sunday's game and now getting to play a 2-4 Heat team and a 2-5 Jazz team at home, these need to be 2 wins. I know the Heat just went to the conference finals, but these need to be 2 wins at home. You talked about how the Grizzlies have to get all the wins that they're supposed to get. They cannot lose to bad teams. Neither the Jazz nor the Heat are a bad team per se, but they are at the tier that the Grizzlies need to beat consistently at home, and I think there's a decent chance they do. Hopefully we're not going to see any more new injuries pop up, and the Grizzlies can roll out a healthy, albeit jawless, rotation.
Yeah.
But that's going to do it for us at Hoops Royalty. I'm King Jemison alongside Karna Venkatraj. We're bringing you Royal Hoops takes on the Memphis Grizzlies and NBA. Shout out to Sam Stack for winning the autographed Ja Morant shirt. And thank you to all those who subscribed or left a 5-star review and nice comment on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Please keep doing that. Get the word on this show out. We also love your comments. I do respond to those comments. I very much enjoy getting into those debates with y'all as well. So keep all that coming. Tell your friends about the show. Tell Grizzlies haters about the show. They've had a lot to enjoy recently. Give them one more thing. And we will be right back here each and every Monday and occasionally on those late game nights as well. Thank y'all so much for listening and have a fantastic rest of your week.